Jack Finley hadn't expected to become humanity's first line of defense against cosmic deities. Then again, Jack hadn't expected a lot of things when he took this job, like the fact that his coffee mug would need to be secured with gravity locks, or that his stapler would occasionally teleport to the fifth dimension. Such were the occupational hazards of being the lone human bureaucrat at the Galactic Embassy's Intergalactic Permit Office, a role Jack had held for precisely 3 years, 2 months, and 17 days, not that he was counting. Except he absolutely was. Next, Jack called out, barely looking up from his terminal as he processed the final details of a hyperspace lane permit for what appeared to be a sentient gas cloud. He stamped the approval with practiced precision, slid it across the counter, and watched as the cloud absorbed the document through some process he'd long ago stopped questioning. The embassy itself was a marvel of engineering, a massive spinning wheel hanging in neutral space at the junction of 7 major hyperlanes. The permit office, however, was decidedly less impressive. Fluorescent lighting that flickered at irregular intervals, floor tiles in an aggressively bureaucratic shade of beige, and a line of increasingly impatient aliens that stretched around the corner. Jack's co-worker, a gelatinous purple blob named Morp, who communicated through a series of bubbles and subtle color changes, gurgled sympathetically from the adjacent counter. "Yeah, I know," Jack replied, somehow understanding perfectly. "Monday rush is the worst." Across the galaxy, humans had developed quite the reputation. Not as warriors, though they could fight when pressed. Not as scientists, though they'd contributed their fair share. No, humanity's true claim to interstellar fame was their bewildering, almost pathological adherence to rules, procedures, and bureaucratic obstinance, especially when dealing with beings who claimed superiority. "Listen, Jack said to the 16-tentacled creature currently arguing about expired credentials, "I don't make the rules." "Well, actually, I did help write subsection 47.b regarding multidimensional appendages, but that's beside the point. You need updated biometric scans. Back of the line, please." The creature made a sound like wet cement being mixed with ball bearings, but eventually slithered away in compliance. Jack sighed, taking a quick sip from his gravity-locked coffee mug. Next. But what happened next would be recorded in the annals of galactic history, though Jack would later argue that the dramatic background music they added in the holovids was completely unnecessary. The air in the waiting room suddenly charged with electricity. The lights flickered, not in their usual half-hearted way, but with dramatic purpose. Reality itself seemed to bend as a figure materialized at the front of the line, bypassing the 97 beings patiently waiting their turn. The figure stood nearly 9 feet tall, with skin that shimmered like oil on water, 4 arms extended from a torso wrapped in what appeared to be living metal, and its eyes, all 7 of them, glowed within a light. A crown of energy hovered above its elongated head. "I am Zeltrax," the being announced in a voice that made the foundations of the building tremble. "Creator of stars, destroyer of worlds, god of the 7th quadrant. I demand immediate audience with the Galactic Council." Every alien in the room immediately prostrated themselves. Even the floating ones somehow managed to look reverential. Morp had turned a sickly shade of mauve and retreated partially into their own exoskeleton. Every alien, that is, except for Jack Finley, who looked up from his terminal with all the enthusiasm of someone being interrupted during their lunch break. "You'll need to take a number," Jack said, tapping his stylus against the desk, "and fill out Form G 7734, request for audience with galactic officials." He reached under the counter and pulled out a datapad, sliding it forward. "Both sides, please." The self-proclaimed god blinked all 7 eyes in perfect sequence, clearly not expecting this response. "Perhaps you misunderstand," Zeltrax boomed, the room temperature rising several degrees. "I am a god." "That's nice," Jack replied. "We still need proof of identity, purpose of visit, and vaccination records. Especially if you've created or destroyed any worlds with registered biohazards in the last solar cycle." He glanced at the trembling aliens still waiting in line, "and you'll need to wait your turn like everyone else." For a moment it seemed as though Zeltrax might vaporize Jack on the spot. The being's skin rippled with barely contained energy, and several small objects around the room began to float. Very impressive, Jack said dryly. But unless you can make these permit requests process themselves, I suggest you take a seat. He pointed to the waiting area with his stylus. There are magazines from 17 different star systems. Some of them don't even cause hallucinations when you read them. A cosmic standoff had begun, and somehow the most unremarkable human in the galaxy was the one holding the line. Morp had fully retreated into their protective membrane, producing anxious bubbles that translated roughly to, "We're all going to die" in 17 languages. Celtrax stood motionless, clearly processing the unexpected defiance. The god's 7 eyes narrowed simultaneously. "You dare—" "I dare to enforce standard operating procedure," Jack interrupted, holding up a hand. "Look, mister." "Celtrax, was it? I've got 43 more appointments before my lunch break, which is in," he checked his wrist device, 56 minutes. "So either take a number and fill out the forms, or come back tomorrow during our extended hours." The waiting room had gone so quiet you could hear a photon drop. Then, to everyone's astonishment, the self-proclaimed deity took the datapad. "This is unexpected," Celtrax rumbled, now at a slightly less foundation-shaking volume. "Your species typically shows more reverence." "Yeah, well, I worked retail before this," Jack replied, already turning to the next alien in line. "Nothing scares me anymore." Morp's color slowly returned to its normal purple as the god moved to the waiting area, datapad clutched awkwardly in one of its 4 hands. The next 2 hours proceeded with surreal normalcy. Jack processed permits, stamped approvals, rejected applications with ruthless efficiency, and occasionally glanced over at the increasingly frustrated deity attempting to navigate the labyrinthine questionnaire. "Question 17 doesn't apply to non-corporeal entities," Jack called out helpfully when he noticed Celtrax struggling. "Just skip to section 4 if you've never technically been born in the traditional sense." By the time Celtrax approached the counter again, the god's radiance had dimmed considerably, and its crown of energy was tilting slightly to one side. "I have completed your paperwork," Celtrax said, sliding the datapad across the counter with significantly less cosmic authority. Jack examined the form with practiced eyes. "You left section 12B blank. That's the part about prior conflicts with registered civilizations. That information is irrelevant." "It's mandatory," Jack countered, sliding the datapad back. "And you'll need to provide at least 3 references who can verify your godhood claims. Non-family members, please." A muscle or whatever passed for muscles in divine anatomy twitched beneath Celtrax's shimmering skin. "I could unmake you with a thought," the god said, leaning forward. "You could," Jack agreed amiably. "But then who would process your paperwork? There's only one other human in this quadrant who understands the filing system, and Beverly's on maternity leave." He gestured to the back of the now empty line. "I'll see you again when you've completed the form properly." As Celtrax reluctantly returned to the waiting area, the office door hissed open, admitting a tall, sharp-featured woman with Commander Pips on her uniform collar. Commander Lila Voss surveyed the room with narrowed eyes, her gaze finally settling on the sulking deity. "Finley," she barked, approaching Jack's counter. "Why is there a Class 7 cosmic entity filling out paperwork in my lobby?" "Standard procedure, man," Jack replied, not looking up from the trade permit he was processing. "Standard," she sputtered, lowering her voice. "That's Celtrax the Inevitable. 3 systems in Sector 9 worship it as their creator." "He still needs to fill out the forms," Jack said firmly. "Rules are rules are rules." And Commander Voss pinched the bridge of her nose. "This is why the Galactic Union thinks humans are insane, Finley. Every other species has the good sense to at least pretend to be impressed by these types. With all due respect." "Man, that's exactly why they come to our counter," Jack replied. "We're the only ones who don't automatically bow." Voss glanced over at Celtrax, who appeared to be angrily tapping at the datapad with 2 fingers while the other 2 hands gesticulated in frustration. "He's hiding something," Jack added quietly. "Notice how he refused to list prior conflicts, and his temporal signature doesn't match his claimed age." Something's off. The commander's expression shifted from exasperation to calculation. Keep him busy, she muttered. I'll run some checks, and Finley. Try not to get vaporized before I get back. No promises, ma'am. As Voss departed, Jack called out, next, despite the room being empty except for the increasingly frustrated deity. Celtrax approached again, slamming the datapad down with enough force to crack its screen. Enough games, the god growled. I have urgent business with your leaders concerning the fate of this sector. I'm sure you do, Jack replied, examining the damaged equipment with a disappointed sigh. That'll be 45 credits for the broken datapad, by the way. For a moment, the air around Celtrax shimmered with heat. Then, remarkably, the being produced a small crystalline chip and tossed it onto the counter. Payment, Celtrax said tersely. Now process my request. Jack picked up the chip, examined it carefully, then dropped it into his desk drawer. Your request has been submitted. Processing time is 3 to 5 business days. 3 to Celtrax's voice rose again to foundation shaking levels. The cosmos cannot wait for your bureaucracy. The cosmos has existed for approximately 13.8 billion years, Jack pointed out reasonably. I think it can manage another week. The god leaned forward, all 7 eyes focused intensely on Jack. You do not understand the urgency. Then perhaps you should explain it, Jack suggested, finally giving Celtrax his full attention. Off the record, of course. Celtrax hesitated, then glanced around the empty office. There are matters of cosmic importance, realignments of power, opportunities that must be seized. Jack said, making a small note on his terminal. And these opportunities, they wouldn't happen to involve access to the galactic treasury, would they? The god's eyes widened fractionally, just enough for Jack to notice. I seek only what is rightfully mine, Celtrax declared, but with slightly less conviction than before. Of course, Jack replied smoothly. We'll just need verification of those rights. Form GE 8801. Proof of divine ownership claims. It's quite straightforward, only 17 pages. The look Celtrax gave him could have boiled steel. Jack's shift had technically ended 30 minutes ago, but he remained at his desk, monitoring Celtrax while pretending to catch up on paperwork. A god had taken up residence in the waiting area, occasionally making small objects orbit around its head in what Jack assumed was either a display of boredom or an attempt to impress the janitor. A 6-legged being named Gerblatt, who remained thoroughly unimpressed. What Celtrax didn't know was that Jack was conducting his own investigation. Between processing routine permits, he had been sending discrete queries through the embassy's network, pulling threads on this supposed deity's background. When his terminal pinged with an encrypted message from Blixby, Jack had to suppress a smile. If anyone could dig up dirt on a god, it would be the embassy's resident information broker, an unassuming 3-eyed alien who looked like a cross between a librarian and a potato. The message was simple: storage closet B, 5 minutes. Bring snacks. E. Jack casually locked his terminal, grabbed a packet of the spicy crisp things that Blixby inexplicably loved, and made his way to the back hallway. Taking my break, he called to Morp, who had finally emerged from their protective membrane and was nervously processing visa extensions. Blixby was already waiting in the dimly lit closet, middle eye twitching with excitement, a sure sign they had good information. You owe me big time, Jack Human, Blixby said, snatching the snack packet and tearing it open with 4 of their 7 fingers. Do you have any idea how many favors I had to call in? I'm sure you'll itemize it on your invoice, Jack replied dryly. What did you find? Blixby's 3 eyes blinked in sequence. Your god is no god at all. Celtrax is one of at least 7 beings pulling the same scam across different sectors. Advanced technology, yes. Divine powers, no. I knew it, Jack muttered. What's the end game? The Galactic Treasury is transferring quintillions in rare earth deposits this cycle, Blixby explained between crunches. Every 1,000 years they moved the reserves between secure facilities. If someone with high enough clearance were to redirect some of those transfers. Jack whistled. That's ambitious. Gets better. Bixby continued, lowering their voice. 3 other gods have already successfully infiltrated different administrative offices. They're just waiting for access codes, which only the Council can provide. And our friend Zeltrax was supposed to get an audience with them. Jack finished. Clever. Too clever by half, Bixby agreed. But here's the kicker: the forms you've been making Zeltrax fill out. They've been flagging security systems across 17 jurisdictions. Your bureaucratic obstinance may have accidentally triggered the biggest fraud investigation in centuries. Jack couldn't help but laugh. So I've been accidentally building a case just by being annoying? Never underestimate the power of paperwork, Jack Human, Bixby said, popping the last crisp into their mouth. Now, how are you going to play this? Jack thought for a moment, then smiled slowly. I think it's time for some special forms. When Jack returned to his desk, Zeltrax was pacing in front of the counter, leaving faint scorch marks on the floor tiles. Good news, Jack announced cheerfully. Your case has been escalated. The false god stopped pacing, all 7 eyes focusing on Jack with sudden intensity. You will grant me an audience. Even better, Jack replied, producing a stack of actual physical papers, a rarity in the digital age. Priority processing. But first, we need just a few more signatures. More paperwork. Zeltrax's voice regained some of its earlier thunder. I have endured enough of your bureaucratic torture. This is different, Jack assured him, spreading the documents across the counter. These are special clearance forms. Sign these, and you'll have direct access to the council chambers and anything else that might interest you. Something calculating flickered in Zeltrax's many eyes. Anything else? Treasury access, secure communication channels. The works, Jack confirmed, sliding a pen across the counter. Just need your signature on the marked lines, all 57 of them. For the first time since its arrival, Zeltrax seemed genuinely pleased. The being picked up the pen with surprising delicacy. I must say, Human, Zeltrax said, dropping the booming god voice for something more conversational, you've been remarkably difficult. Your species' reputation for bureaucratic stubbornness is well earned. We aim to disappoint, Jack replied pleasantly, watching as Zeltrax began signing the documents. What the false god didn't realize was that these weren't access forms at all. They were confessions, carefully worded admissions to fraud, conspiracy, and impersonation of a cosmic entity which carried particularly harsh penalties in this sector. Every signature was being recorded and verified against biometric readings Jack's terminal was subtly taking. As Zeltrax signed the final document with a flourish, the office doors hissed open. Commander Voss entered, flanked by 4 security officers and a small floating drone that Jack recognized as a truth field generator. Perfect timing, Jack said, gathering the signed papers with deliberate care. Zeltrax glanced between Jack and the security detail, realization dawning across its shimmering features. You tricked me. Beast. I processed your paperwork, Jack corrected, just not the paperwork you thought. Zeltrax, or should I say, Grift Nexus Member 447, Commander Voss announced formally, you are being detained on suspicion of cosmic fraud, identity falsification, and attempting to manipulate galactic financial systems. The being's skin darkened with rage. You cannot hold me. I am a god. About that, Jack interjected, holding up one of the signed forms. According to paragraph 3, which you just signed, you are, and I quote, a member of the non-divine species known as Chimerians, using advanced technology to create the illusion of godhood. Your words, not mine. I never wrote that. But you signed it, Jack pointed out, and in the presence of a calibrated truth field, no less, very binding in galactic court. For a moment it seemed Zeltrax might actually attempt to use whatever powers it did possess. The air crackled with energy, and Jack instinctively ducked behind his counter. But instead of an explosion of divine wrath, there came only a sigh of defeat. Fine. Exceltrax said, its voice now entirely normal. You caught me. But you should know there are others, already being rounded up. Commander Voss interrupted. Your colleagues at the Trade Commission, Financial Regulation Office, and Transit Authority have all been detained. The signatures you provided gave us everything we needed. As security officers moved to place containment cuffs on the deflated deity, Jack couldn't resist adding, for future reference, real gods don't need to fill out paperwork. They just know it's already been done. The awards ceremony was, in Jack's opinion, completely unnecessary. But the Galactic Embassy had insisted on recognizing the human who had single-handedly prevented what investigators were calling the heist of the millennium. He stood uncomfortably on a small platform in the embassy's central atrium, trying not to fidget as Ambassador Kathox, a being composed primarily of light and good intentions, droned on about exemplary service and the unique human capacity for stubborn adherence to rules. Commander Voss stood nearby, looking almost proud at expression Jack had previously thought physically impossible for her face to form. And so, the ambassador concluded, it is with great pleasure that I announce Jack Finley's promotion to Chief Regulatory Officer for the entire diplomatic section. The assembled crowd of embassy workers, diplomats, and curious onlookers applauded in their various species-specific ways. Morp had turned a vibrant shade of celebratory magenta and was releasing congratulatory bubbles that smelled faintly of cinnamon. Jack accepted the ceremonial badge with as much grace as he could muster, then leaned toward the microphone. Thank you all. But I was just doing my job, he said simply. In the end, it wasn't heroics that saved the day, it was paperwork. Never underestimate the power of a properly filed form. The crowd laughed, but Jack wasn't entirely joking. Later, as the reception wound down, Commander Voss approached him with a glass of something that glowed softly blue. Congratulations, Chief Officer Finley, she said, handing him the drink. You've done humanity proud. Jack accepted the glass warily. It's not going to give me temporary omniscience, is it? Last time I tried alien alcohol, I could taste colors for a week. Just champagne, Voss assured him. Imported from Earth. They clinked glasses in an ancient human tradition that most aliens found either charming or baffling. You know what's funny? Jack said after taking a sip. In all our history of space exploration, we humans always imagined we'd meet gods and cosmic beings with either worship or warfare. Turns out, all we needed was a filing system. Voss chuckled. There's a lesson in there somewhere. Yeah, Jack agreed. The lesson is, gods and con artists alike should fear bureaucracy more than they fear heroes. As if on cue, Jack's new official communicator beeped with an incoming message. He glanced at it and groaned. What is it? Voss asked. My first assignment, Jack replied, showing her the screen. Apparently there's an actual pantheon of minor deities applying for residential permits in Sector 12. They've filled out all the wrong forms. The universe needs its bureaucrats, Finley, Voss said with something approaching sympathy. And for better or worse, humanity seems to have found its cosmic niche. Jack sighed dramatically, but couldn't quite hide his smile. In a galaxy full of wonders, terrors, and gods both real and fake, who would have thought that humanity's superpower would be paperwork? But as he scheduled his first meeting with the Pantheon for 9 a.m. sharp the next morning, Jack realized there was something profoundly reassuring in that thought. In a universe of chaos, humans had found power in creating order, one form at a time. Even the gods would have to get in line,